Hi there, and welcome back to Skyship Stories. As we said at the end of episode 3, in this fourth episode, and over the course of the next couple of episodes, we're changing the format a little bit, and going into where Rod explains some of the technical aspects of flying skyships. Some of the theory that Rod explains may be a little bit confusing, and does go to show that flying airships is not quite as easy as we think, by comparing them to traditional aircraft. But do bear with us, we try and explain the details. So sit back, fasten your seatbelts as we vector those engines, push full power and upship. Welcome to episode 4 of Skyship Stories.
Was there a difference? You sort of started to mention that there was a difference between, first of all, we've got the shape of the earlier envelopes, which weren't pointed. You know, the early 500s were almost elliptical in a way. And then I think I remember they changed some of the designs to the slightly later pointed envelopes for the 500s.
Yeah, that's right.
What was the sort of speed differences and characteristics between a sort of 500 and the 600?
They were very, very similar to fly.
Right.
The 600, the 500 with the pointed tail was 52 meters long. The 600 is 59 and 12 millimeters. I'd love to know who thought the extra 12 millimeters were necessary, but there you go.
Yeah.
But the 600 structural weight was only about 40% greater, but its lift was much greater. So the gondola was bigger, we had more seats when we were carrying passengers, that kind of thing. But the actual handling of the ship was very, very similar. It's a strange business. The ship effectively weighs nothing. One of the things we used to do when people visited on the ground was you'd make sure the ballast was right, and while you were talking to them, with one hand you'd lift the ship up so the wheel is about 3 feet off the ground, and when you let go it didn't go anywhere, it just stayed there. And then you'd reach up and you'd put it back down again. It weighs nothing, but it has a mass. The 500, 5.25 tons maximum. The 600, over 6.5 tons. So it's got the inertia of a truck.
Yeah.
Even though one man can lift it up and put it back down again.
Yeah.
So you had to be a little bit more careful with the 600. It didn't slow down as rapidly.
I was going to say things like slowing it down. Yeah,
I mean, it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a big deal to change from one to the other. You had to be aware that it was bigger. They had very similar. One of the important limits, of course, is when it's on the ground, how nose down or tail down you are. You do not want to strike the bottom fin on the ground.
Yeah.
On occasion, in gusty conditions, you might just touch the chin of the gondola on the ground as she was bucking around in the crew's hands, very occasionally. And in fact, we had a yacht buffer.
Oh, right. A fender, yes.
Just for exactly that purpose. The angles were pretty similar for the 500 and 600. The 600 theoretically was a bit more critical, but you didn't notice it. And the vast majority of the time, you didn't get the fin anywhere near the ground. So the big difference really was the amount of disposable lift, the payload you could put on the thing, or the amount of fuel. 450 kilos of fuel instead of 350 in a 500. But it was perfectly easy to jump from one to the other, fly a 600 this morning and a 500 this afternoon without sort of resetting your mind.
Yeah. And obviously things like the controls and everything were virtually identical.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, the instrument layout and the cockpit was identical. Some of the settings were different. The speed limits on the props, on the engines were different, that kind of thing. But no, I mean, it looked and felt almost identical.
Fantastic. Okay.
One of the differences though with the big ship, non-rigid, is most of the weight is the envelope, and then you've got sort of fixed overhead of the gondola and the fins and some stiffening in the nose. You double the length of the ship, you square its area, so you've squared the weight, but you've cubed the lift, you've cubed the volume.
Right. Yeah.
So the bigger a ship is, the more efficient it is as a weightlifter. And yet, most of what we did was done as percentages of volume. So, for example, 360 feet of altitude would cause the helium to expand by 1%. No, it doesn't matter what size the ship is.
Yeah.
It's 1% of that size. That kind of thing. And you had similar sort of rules of thumb for changes of temperature. So we had these weird sort of conversion figures in our heads that any physicist would scream and run away to find a psychiatrist. 360 feet equals 2 3/4 degrees Celsius.
Right.
Equals 1 inch water gauge pressure. That doesn't make any sense at all. There's no way feet could, and it equals so many kilograms. It was all about percentages of volume and percentages of lift. So the rules applied, whatever the size of the ship. It's just that the number you came out with at the end for the change in lift was a bit bigger with a 600 than a 500.
Things like, flying airships with temperatures, you talked about when you were at week school when it was extremely hot. What were the difficulties when it was extremely cold? In this country it can be.
The ship changes with the seasons.
Right.
So when it is hot, the helium will be expanded when everything else is equal and you're just sitting on the ground. But if you want to climb to any height, you need a certain amount of air in the ballonets, so you can't put so much helium in.
Right.
So when it's hot, you've got less lift because you've got less helium. As it gets to autumn and the season gets colder, you can put more helium in.
Yeah.
Because the same amount of helium is a smaller bubble, which means that you can lift more or you can go higher. Pressure height is always a trade-off. Or there is always a trade-off between pressure height and the ability to lift, the gross lift of the ship.
Yeah.
So in winter, you can put more helium in, you can lift more. The good thing in winter is that generally speaking, there are fewer thermals. When it's thermally, as you fly, it's a big craft. It is big. So a thermal is a bubble of rising warm air. If you think of it a bit like the shape of a fountain, there is a fountain, something heats the ground, the sun heats the ground, and you get some warm air rising and it reaches as high as it's going to go and it gently spills outwards and comes down. Now, as you fly through that, the first thing you encounter probably is falling air, but the nose encounters it maybe 10, 15 seconds before the tail. So you may well pitch down.
Yeah.
Then the nose gets into the rising air and starts to lift, at which point the tail is in the falling air around the edge and tries to go down. So now the ship climbs with the rising air, then it comes out the other side and you get the opposite effect.
Gosh.
So it has this motion just like a boat on a rolling sea. But of course, if you don't hit the thermal absolutely square on the nose, if it's off to one side, at the same time, the nose comes up and falls off to the side. So you spend your whole time in thermally conditions, pushing forward and turning one way, then pulling back and turning the other way, and then pushing forward, and then you're out the other side. And then 30 seconds later, you fly over another ploughed field, which has got another thermal, and it all happens all over again, the other way round.
Golly.
In winter, you get much, much less of that. On a bright, sunny winter's day, you can still get thermals. Of course you can. But you get much, much less of that in winter.
We thank Rod for his expertise in explaining some of the more technical aspects of flying skyships. Join us next time for Skyship Stories episode 5, where Rod takes us into, again, some more of the details of what it's like to actually fly a skyship. Until next time, keep vectoring those engines.